Regarding today's format, we actually hope very much that we're going to have a very fruitful discussion during this event, and we also expect that there will be active participation and engagement from all the partners and invitees. For this, we ask you to please be very active, ask your questions in the chat during the presentations from our speakers, and we're going to be trying to touch upon some of the most important issues.
А також в кінці нашої події в нас буде частина присвячена саме обговоренню.
And also we're going to have the part where we're going to be discussing the things and you'll be able to take the floor. You can also raise your hand on Zoom. This is an available tool that you can use. If you just put just press reactions where you can actually raise your hand, or you can alternatively ask your questions in the chat. So thank you very much. And I want to remind you that we have an online webcasting on Facebook and YouTube. And also this meeting is being recorded. So you will be able to actually watch it later after we're done. And now I'm getting straight forward to the content of our meeting and invite our honorable guests to take the floor for the welcoming remarks. This is Nicholas Harricks, Deputy Head of Mission at the British Embassy in Kyiv, and also Irina Stavchuk, Deputy Minister of Environment and National Resources of Ukraine. I would say natural resources of Ukraine. Without a doubt, I could say that these people are really champions in climate. So we're so much grateful to the British Embassy in Ukraine for the work that they have been doing. And we highly appreciate and value your contribution. It is the United Kingdom who now plays a very difficult role, actually, to host the COP26 under the UN Climate Change Convention that should have taken place last year, and now they were moved to November this year because of the lockdown. We all faced the pandemic and the crisis. But nevertheless, we've seen how strong and great work is being done by the United Kingdom, and in particular by the British Embassy here in Kyiv, to actually encourage and invite the entire communities and the whole world to this active climate action. Thank you very much for this. Nicholas, please, the floor is yours.
Дуже дякую, пані Оксано.
Thank you very much, Oksana.
Дуже приємно вітати всіх учасників.
I'm so happy to welcome all the participants of our roundtable discussion. It is called How the Implementation of the National Climate Policy Can Contribute and Benefit the Development of Cities. And thanks to everybody who has joined our discussion online. As you know, we are now going through a very serious global crisis. It has to do with COVID-19 pandemic, which is probably the biggest challenge for the humanity ever. But at the same time, while the world is paying and dedicating a lot of attention to fighting the pandemic, we do not have to forget about climate change, as it is one of the most and largest, I think, challenges in the long run. We've already seen the climate change outcomes in the entire world. And in Ukraine, they could also feel the changes. For instance, there were record-breaking temperatures, there were floods and droughts. They all had very adverse impact on our environment and the people. Of course, those challenges and changes are not unique for Ukraine alone. If the mankind does not act now, then the global ambient temperature will be raised by 3 more degrees centigrade. And this can cause new floods, more pollution, more wildfires, annihilation of different species of the largest extent possible. This is why the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson called for collective action to jointly counter climate change. This is one of the priorities of the British government's international policy around the globe. This is why in November, the United Kingdom, in partnership with Italy, is organizing the 26th International Conference under the auspices of the United Nations. It's called COP26, like Oksana already mentioned. That's going to happen in Glasgow, Scotland. This event is called to actually put together the international leaders to actually coordinate proper action to deter temperature rises and to protect the entire planet. In this context, cities have to play an important role. Globally, cities produce more than 70% of CO2 emissions around the world. And by 2050, cities will have more than 70% of the entire global population. This urbanization growth has a very adverse impact from this climate change standpoint. Air quality, water delivery and its quality, land use, and waste management. At the same time, this process is giving us a lot of opportunities. Climate change can be used to create sustainable and dynamic cities where it is nice to live, where there are good employment opportunities, where there is economic development and progress, much better living conditions, where dwellers can actually save on less spendings to protect their health, to pay for the fossil fuels, etc. In order to take advantage of the new opportunities, government policies at the national and regional levels has to be properly coordinated. That's why it is a special pleasure for me today that we have this discussion launched right now, which I hope will be the beginning of many discussions to come around this very important issue about the city's role in response to climate change. I would like to express my words of sincere gratitude to all the guests and all the speakers of the day who are participating in today's event and ready to share their experience and plans as well as best practices for us to keep going forward. And I'm especially honored and thankful to the organizers of this event. Thanks very much to Eco Club Rivne and Heinrich Böll Stiftung Foundation for their great job that they've done in preparing this event. This is a fascinating event, isn't it? And I want to wish everybody very successful discussions. Thank you for your attention. Thanks a lot, Nicholas. And of course, we're so much grateful to the entire government of the United Kingdom and your embassy in particular for the great work that you've been doing for us and that you've already done to mobilize our efforts and fight against climate change. And thank you for mentioning the role cities can play and cities may contribute to climate change because their share of responsibility is immense. And therefore the urbanization pace, this pace is overwhelming, especially in Ukraine. I mean, this urbanized population is getting even higher than the average around the world. That's why for Ukraine, this is a very acute challenge. What we know already about what's going on around the globe and under the preparation for these climate negotiations and what the changes that we've observed already. For instance, we live in Ukraine and the globalized world has shown that we are all dependent on the place where we live at this point of time in the pandemic, because there were a lot of restrictions, mobility was actually limited, and we might think, yeah, we can flee somewhere, but that's not the case. This is why we have to pay even more attention to our surrounding, to the place where we live specifically. And the great role there is played by the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. So we've seen a lot of news about their accomplishments, like the limited use of plastic bags or the progress they've made to actually retain more quality water resources, to limit the phosphates in the chemicals that we're using at home. And this work is immense. So I'm inviting now Irina Stavchuk for the welcoming remarks, and she's going to talk on behalf of the ministry. Good morning, dear Nicholas, dear representatives of cities and regions of Ukraine. I'm so glad to welcome everybody here at today's event, and thanks very much for organizing it today, because climate change is actually a multifaceted task at all levels. And we, as the ministry and government in general, have to incorporate certain public policy agendas, but the implementation is still going on locally. And we need to understand whatever opportunities we have, whatever challenges we're facing at the local level, in order to make sure we get to the great achievements soon. At the public policy level, we have a very ambitious agenda right now for climate change. Ukraine actually in this matter has supported the European Green Deal, and at the highest political level, right now the talks are going on to establish a proper dialogue platform to implement different flagship initiatives, but in general, the coordination and the implementation of different events in Ukraine of the Green Deal is underway. So the Ministry of Environment is now finalizing the work to prepare the updated, the nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. And that is actually a real benchmark for the long run. All the way until 2030. And the key transformations are reflected there in the key sectors of the economy. I'm going to tell a bit later about this, where I'm going to share more details with you. What we have included, what are the key transformations that we expect, what kind of vision there is at the ministry regarding these goals until 2030. We're also doing a lot in actually adjusting to climate change. We have developed this strategy, and right now we're finalizing the action plan to it. Because despite we need to cut CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions to prevent catastrophes in the future, we can already feel the climate changes in the number of different sectors, and those adverse effects are very apparent. That's why there is a lot of need to understand the forecasts and understand those adaptational measures that we need to plan and start performing. And at the end, I have to tell you that actually our climate policy and CO2 emission reductions, which you're going to see in our presentations, this is not a standalone issue. It's not a siloed issue. It's not, I mean, torn away from the economy. It all has to be considered holistically. I mean, that includes many sectors. This way, thinking holistically, we can create much better living and economic conditions, cleaner air, and better surrounding environment. Of course, this implementation is not an easy objective. It requires joint action at so many different levels of the society and government. This requires clear regulatory mechanisms and financial support. And hopefully, within this event's auspices, we can discuss those challenges and issues regarding how we can keep going forward in implementing those key transformations for Ukraine. Thank you. Oh, thanks a lot, Irina. And thank you so much for this very inspiring, welcoming remarks, actually aimed at joining our efforts so that we could actually establish a much more productive dialogue between different levels of our society and government. The dialogue has to be both vertically and horizontally integrated so that everybody, all the stakeholders, could actually join their efforts to find a solution to climate change. Naturally, we couldn't miss the opportunity to invite our great partners from the United Kingdom. And of course, we want to learn more about the United Kingdom's best practice regarding how communities cooperated in different levels, on the national and subnational level stakeholders in developing climate policies at the national level and also locally as well. So it is my great pleasure to invite an expert from Bristol, United Kingdom, Alex. We were wondering to learn more about how you have established this cooperation between the national and local levels, and how cities can participate in building the national climate policy, and what kind of role municipalities and cities can play not only in the development and in the adoption of greenhouse gas emission reductions, and but also in the implementation process. So we're wondering to see and hear how those processes are established and being organized in the United Kingdom, please. Alex? We're going to have the presentation right now from Alex Minshall.
Good morning or good afternoon, I think, possibly. Yeah, I'm Alex Minshall. I am Sustainable City and Climate Change Manager at Bristol City Council, and it's an honour to be joining you today, and thank you very much for inviting me. I will have to apologise because I'm, for the first day in more than 1 year, I'm in City Hall for other meetings, and so there's a bit more, maybe a little bit more noise around me than in my home office, which is where I've been, or my dining room, as we used to call it, before the pandemic. So I have a few slides today to hopefully address the questions that you have posed there. And if someone could move this next slide for me, that'd be helpful. So Bristol, maybe you should just say a little bit about Bristol. So Bristol is a city of about 500,000 people in the west of England, and we're the UK's 10th largest city. So we're a nice size for doing things, but we've also been working on climate change for quite a long time. We were one of the first cities in the United Kingdom to have a climate strategy back in 2004, which was actually the year by chance that I started working for the municipality. It started just before me. And you're talking about how you can help with the development of national policy. Well, Bristol was one of the cities which helped campaign for the UK Climate Change Act, so the legislation that has set statutory targets for the UK, and those targets have been increased over time. We're a very proud European city, and we were European Green Capital in 2015. So obviously for our work on climate change, but also our work across a wide range of environmental issues. But in 2018, the Mayor, in response to the IPPC report, realised that all the work we had done and the good progress we had made was insufficient. And so he declared a climate emergency. And what that means really is saying that we need to do things differently and we need to do things much faster. And in 2020, we have our new One City climate strategy, which sets out the trajectory for the city. And we've set, what's been important within the city is we've managed to maintain political support from different political parties within the council, within the municipality over the years. They don't always agree on many things, but the need for action on climate change has been one that there has been consensus about. How you do it is obviously still a very intensely discussed political issue. So our current goal is that we want to be carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2030. Now that's not a target, that's an aspiration, and we recognise that is a very, very ambitious target, as we'll see in a moment. My next slide then, please. So we have made good progress. We've reduced emissions by nearly 40%, which was our goal for 2020. And our emissions come now pretty much equally from transport, from our use of energy in homes, and from our use of energy in business. And that's a combination of electricity and natural gas. And the electricity has been increasingly generated by renewable means, and so the carbon intensity of that has come down very significantly, and that's made a real contribution, and that's a national measure. But within the city, we've been able to drive up improve the energy efficiency of buildings, whether they're in public or in private ownership, and that's the combination of that has helped to achieve that. So the black line on this graph is roughly the UK statutory target for 2050, and the red line is how we would like to, as a city, achieve. Now, we'll hope we'll be somewhere in between at the end, but how quickly we can bring our emissions down over the next 5 years, 10 years will be an important part of our success. So my next slide, please. So this is an image which you probably can't read, and also all the words are in English. So, but it's a diagram from a report from our statutory Committee on Climate Change, which provides the government with advice on achievement on setting targets and how they might achieve those. And this is a report which is linked in the presentation. I'm assuming you'll get some slides after the event, and you can look at it. And this sets out the role of local government in tackling climate change in the UK. And the next slide then, please. And this slide contains the words of that diagram a little more legibly, really. And what they recognise is that from the bottom of this picture, you have, as a municipality, we have control of our buildings and our vehicles and things like that. And then we purchase goods and services, but we also shape the cities that we live in through our planning, our land use, our transport policies. But then we can go beyond that, and we can showcase, which is maybe what I'm doing here, sharing our experiences with you, but also inspiring new projects, innovation. We can work with partners, and we can involve the communities that we serve and that elect our officials, our politicians. And so within that sort of spheres of influence, and that's why I showed the diagram, the direct control at the bottom is the small one, and the public is the big one. So that it shows that you have a lot of control over the smaller bits of the city's footprint and more indirect influence over the larger thing, which is everything that the citizens may consume within the city. So the next slide, please. I just thought it would be helpful to give you a couple of examples from some of those layers. So starting at the top of that list, we had the citizens. And I said we had very good political support for action on climate change, and I think that is partly because we also have good public support, and those two things have worked hand in hand. We've been talking to people in the city about climate change for many years. That's raised their awareness. They therefore want more action, and it's a ratchet. I don't know, apologies for the translator. It goes up, one thing increases the next thing, if that makes sense. What that's now allowed us to do is hold an exercise on the left, which is a picture of Zoom. We all now recognise of a thing called a citizens' assembly, where we recruited about 60 people who are representative of the city demographically, their age, their gender, their race, their religion, and their income. And we asked them to make some recommendations about different issues. And so we took climate change and how we heat our homes to that, and they came up with some really useful recommendations. And what that gives us is a very strong mandate for implementation of those actions now. So we know we have a general political will, and we know we have this more specific mandate from the Assembly. It's not a formal assembly. The Assembly it has no legal status. It's a consultative process. My next slide then. So one of the things we've also been able to do is bring together all the major partners in the city. That's businesses, civil society, other public bodies and agencies, to create a common strategy about how we're going to achieve our goals of carbon reduction, but also climate resilience. So for example, the move away from gas as a heating fuel to electricity through heat pumps and district heating networks is our sort of, and that's now a common view of how the transition that we want to make as a city. And the next slide, please. You asked to talk about some of the benefits of this. Well, we believe that and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the Ukrainian currency at this point in my notes, we believe there's a huge opportunity for investment in the city, and that will create a lot of jobs. And what we decided is that about 1/5 of that, we think the city council can be involved in delivery of it, because it relates to things that we have some control or influence over, our own buildings, our own district heating, etc. And so we're seeking a strategic partner to work with us to invest substantially in that project, and to ensure that we get both the environmental benefits of reduced carbon, but that we also get those jobs for local people, and that we get the wider economic benefits of that investment. And then my final slide, I think there's one more, I think. No, that's it. Okay, apologies. So hopefully in those few minutes, I've been able to show you just a couple of examples of the things that we're doing, both from a kind of practical projects, but also more systemically about how we're working as a municipality within the city and with national government. And what I haven't talked about is there's a lot of cooperation between cities in the UK. So I chair a group of the 10 largest cities in the United Kingdom who are working on, outside London, who are working on climate change, so that we can share our experiences, we share our successes, but we also, in a friendly environment, are able to share the things that haven't gone so well. And that's incredibly useful for really moving. If we need to move, as we do, we need to move very quickly to reduce the carbon footprint of UK, of the European continent, of the wider world. So I hope that's been of some use, and hopefully some of the links there might be a helpful reference for the future. Thank you very much for your time today.
Дякуємо дуже, Алексе. Це дійсно була дуже цікава
Thank you,
презентація.
Alex. Indeed, it was a very interesting presentation. And you mentioned one of the very important tools which can be used to put our efforts together and build proper goals for the municipal level and the nationwide levels. Are there any other tools apart from the cooperation between the cities? Like you mentioned, that you cooperate with the 10 largest cities. Maybe there are other institutional platforms that can help cities contribute to this joint work, and for them to be able to communicate about the issues they have, maybe proposals they generate to better shape the national and local climate change policies, and also give their feedback to the national level government.
It's a good question, and perhaps when now you ask me the question, I'm thinking that we're not. There aren't very strong networks like that. I think there is an association of municipalities called the Local Government Association, and they are increasing their work on climate change. But no, we don't. I don't think we have great examples of structures that enable that cooperation. It is quite one-off. It's quite case by case rather than systemic, I think it would be fair to say.
Дякуємо дуже.
Thank you so much, Alex. This has been inspiring on the one hand, because we can see some of the municipalities in the world, like Bristol, who are real climate champions and leaders. And I'm impressed that you want to be carbon neutral by 2030, and that's a very ambitious plan, isn't it? And that's very impressive. But what's cool about this, and I want to thank Alex for the presentation, is that we are working together. So it is my pleasure to welcome Agate Chavicoli. What's cool about this, like I said, is that the United Kingdom and the whole world have not only one city who is ready to take the ambitious commitment, but there are many cities like this. And Agate, she represents a global leadership platform. It is called C40 Cities and Global Cities Lead to COP26 that will be hosted by the United Kingdom. And in this context, we're trying to mobilize, they are trying to mobilize as many stakeholders as possible. So Ms. Chevicholli works in this sector, and there's a nice company that is called The Way to Zero, and or Race to Zero, yes, indeed. So what it means is that the cities that are joining the campaign, they are really willing to and thinking about how to be climate and carbon neutral. Agate, we're wondering to hear from you about this campaign called Race to Zero. And what's more important in this context probably is to mention what kind of advantages cities may receive from joining this campaign. What is it going to give and contribute to the local development? Agate, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oksana, and thank you everyone for joining this event today. I'm really honored to have been invited. And so I will be very glad to speak to all of you today about the really important Cities Race to Zero campaign. It's particularly an honor to talk to all of you about this global campaign that currently rallies well over 700 cities, just after we've heard from the city of Bristol, who indeed is absolutely inspirational in their ambition, and is indeed part of this campaign through their ambitious commitments to become net zero by 2030. So I'm really honored to speak after my colleague, Alex. As Oksana explained, I represent the organization called C40 Cities, and I am also on part-time secondment. So I work part-time for the COP26 Climate Champions team. In this role, I am tasked with driving the engagement of cities in the COP, and the main tool for doing this is the Cities Race to Zero campaign. If we could go to the next slide very quickly, I'll skim over rather fast over my introduction because I know we're a little bit tight on time. But the next slide is really just, I don't know if it's changing now. This is really just to stress how important the upcoming COP26 milestone is. Every nation in the world is expected to enhance their emissions to reach net zero by 2050. If we could go to the next slide. And it's really important that in this process, everyone has a role to play. This is a call that the UNSG Secretary General often makes, and that the Cities Race to Zero and the COP26 process really wants to uphold, which is every country, but also city and other stakeholders must take decisive action so that we can realize this vision. If we could go to the next slide, please. Cities, as you know, is particularly important to driving ambitious climate action, not just because they are responsible for a lot of the emissions, but also because they're amongst the most vulnerable. And we also know that nowadays, cities are also suffering some of the worst impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. If we could go to the next slide, please. So it's really important for us to marry the objectives of delivering on the long-term goal of climate neutrality together with taking action on a green and just recovery. We really think these objectives are mutually reinforcing and that we should not lose sight of the long-term climate goals because of the current stress that we are under as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But that actually setting a clear trajectory in terms of climate change can also help you plan for recovery actions that are going to help restart our economy with a stronger focus on green jobs, job creations, more resilience, better air quality, and so on. So we have, as part of the Global Race to Zero campaign, designed and delivered by the champions, we have created a track that's specific for the cities called Cities Race to Zero. And all cities in the world are invited to join this, this campaign. If we could go to the next slide, please. The objective of the race globally is to drive stakeholders to commit to net zero emissions and to taking immediate action in order to curb emissions by 2030, in line with the 1.5 objective of the Paris Agreement. And already you can see on this slide, there are over 700 cities part of the campaign and many other stakeholders, such as businesses or universities. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is just to stress the importance of this campaign. At its launch just a year ago, it's created nearly 3 million readership of the news coverage of the launch. And tomorrow, I'm excited to say that we are celebrating the 1 year of the campaign. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is just to stress again that our objective is to build a coalition strong of 1,000 cities and local governments around the world that would join the Cities Race to Zero. If we could go to the next slide, please. There are several benefits for cities to join Cities Race to Zero. Firstly, the partners that have come together to design this campaign will make available to all the cities and local governments the best available resources to plan climate actions and to plan a green recovery. That includes support to set a target, support to deliver and implement specific actions that we know have a high impact on curbing emissions and delivering a green and just recovery. It's also a benefit of your city is showing your citizens, showing your youth, and showing the world that you are taking action on the greatest threats to humanity and the greatest challenge of the 21st century, to show that you are on top of the climate challenge and your city is taking action. You will also have the opportunity to demonstrate your leadership in this global movement and at the biggest climate event of the decade, with your peers from across your region, from across Europe and across the world. And finally, your participation would give you access to global media platforms to really spread the word about what you are doing in your city, what your achievements are. We have, for example, a partnership with TED Countdown, and the objective really is to give the floor and elevate the voice of cities so they can speak about their great accomplishments. The next slide, please, is just to reiterate the requirements of the campaign. We ask 5 things of cities. 1, that they endorse a set of principles. 2, that they pledge to reach net zero no later than 2050. And to limit global warming by 1.5. 3, that you set an interim target, so a 2030 target, consistent with delivering your fair share of global emission reductions by 2030. 4, cities need to proceed to planning at least one action, such as, for example, procuring zero-emission buses. And finally, the fifth requirement is that you publicly report your target, your emission reduction target, and your actions, as well as how you're progressing every year. So these are the 5 requirements. We have support from the campaign partners all along those steps. We have a website, which I will paste the address into the chat box. At the moment, we haven't translated all of the resources in Ukrainian, but we will be happy, along with our partners in the Ukraine, to help any city who wishes to join the campaign. So this is for a short overview. I really hope it has sparked your interest, and I really hope that in coming months we can welcome Ukrainian cities into the race to zero. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Дякуємо дуже, пані Агато. І це дуже надихає, що
Thanks a lot. That's really inspiring that not only one city, but many cities are engaged in this Race to Zero challenge. Because in Ukraine, we also have cities who would be ready to jump in and participate in the campaign. They are ready to accept the challenge and be very ambitious about their climate goals. And this is why we invited a lot of representatives from cities today. So by the end of this call, I'm sure you will get to know more about what they do and what they are ready to encourage more. Now we are coming back from the United Kingdom to Ukraine, and we're so happy that we have Irina Stavchuk with us in the context that today they are updating the national climate goals and targets. This is to cut the emissions and under the Paris Agreement. These are called nationally determined contributions. And in Ukraine, there's already the second goal. That's why you can see this acronym NDC2. So this is a really fascinating NDC2 that a lot has been talked about these days. So I'm inviting now Irina Stavchuk, Deputy Minister of Environment, to tell us more about those goals and what the ministry has been doing and how this all can impact positively the local development, the municipal development. Please tell us about how we want to achieve those goals and what kind of support will be required from the cities for this goal to be achieved. Irina, the floor is yours. Thanks very much, Oksana. My presentation is really technical, but hopefully it is going to help you better understand the context, and it's going to be of great use for other partners and in terms of the development of their cities and regions. Well, first of all, just a couple of slides about the background information. So in the black color, you can see the greenhouse gas emissions, and you've probably heard that since 1990, Ukraine has cut the greenhouse gas emissions quite substantially, primarily due to the closure of many industrial enterprises. But later, what was interesting is that our economy has been reviving, and you can see that since the end of the 90s and at least till 2008, the GDP of Ukraine has grown quite substantially, but at the same time, there was no proportionate increase in the greenhouse emissions. This is called decapping. So when the greenhouse gas emissions do not follow the same track like the GDP growth, so the GDP may continue to grow, while the greenhouse gas emissions do not at the same time. So we can see this dependence because the 2008 crisis, where we've seen some of the dependence in the greenhouse gas emissions, and then the annexation and the crisis since the beginning of the warfare in 2014. So our objective right now is to have another decoupling in the future, to make sure our GDP continues to grow, and that should not automatically mean the increase of the greenhouse gas emissions. At this slide, you can see the trends across the different sectors. And if you try to analyze them, you can see that the energy and industry sectors, they have not been growing over the years. And this also means that there is a kind of upgrading going on, not as fast as we would like it to be, but actually with all the new technology, with every upgrading, this all contributes to much better environmental conditions, and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Where we can see continuous growth is agriculture and land use, that over the last period of time has been picking up its share in the Ukraine's economy. And the land treatment techniques that have been used over the time, they unfortunately led to the increase of the greenhouse gas emissions. Ukraine remains to be very poor from the energy efficiency standpoint. So our climate policy is primarily targeted at strengthening Ukraine's energy efficiency, because in this process, there are so many different advantages pretty much for all the people, for all the stakeholders. Under our preparation of the updated nationally determined contribution with the support of Sweden and EBRD experts, as well as the Ukrainian experts from the Ukraine's National Academy of Science, we tried to model the economic development depending on the different scenarios. Carbon neutral status should be achieved by 2050, and we have developed these adapted scenarios not to just figure out how much we can contribute to this, but to see where those reductions, in which sectors those reductions can be cheaper, and where we can achieve the greater impact, and how it's going to be reflected on the economy. We want to make sure the climate action is part of our economic development policy. And in order to make sure it happens, the strategy that was adopted till 2030, it suggests the same development areas and key transformation spots. And it is primarily aimed at achieving climate neutrality not later than by 2060. And why it is so? If we try to evaluate the goals that we intend to achieve by 2050, it's going to require a lot of investment, especially between 2040 and 2050. The investment required is even greater than the investment that we have encouraged over the last years. So it's difficult to accept those commitments pretty much. So we've also been working in the context of the updated international policy on climate change. And the most active positions is followed by the European Union with the greenhouse gas emission reduction plan to 55% by 2030, which is almost a double decrease, or by 30% decrease as compared to 2019. And there's a very ambitious goal the United States has pursued. They want to cut their emissions twice from the current level. Canada has also increased its ambition, as well as Japan. So actually, this reflects the current situation, that at the highest political level in the countries, the global leaders, despite the difficult political decisions that have to be made, and there are things that are difficult to implement, nevertheless, they remain to be very ambitious in the context of how serious climate change really is. Because scientists keep saying that unless we are addressing those adverse trends globally, and unless we fail, and unless we pay attention to reducing emissions, the planet will be facing a lot of challenges, and it's going to put at risk a number of territories, ecosystems, and especially those very densely populated areas. So there are no other alternatives whatsoever, but just the need to find solutions and actually try to transverse those trends towards greenhouse gas emission reductions. We now have a reduction by 37+% as compared to 1990, but we want to go down as much as 35%, even more. And there are hot discussions going on at the national level, because if you're talking to the people who deal with climate change, when we're talking to our international partners, everybody can tell that the goals are very ambitious, or even too much ambitious, because the risks are huge and we need to reduce those emissions even more. And when we're talking about these issues to the Ukrainian business, especially in the energy sector, they're really concerned about how those reductions can be achieved in the conditions of the crisis, in the conditions that we lack financial resources. So from the ministry standpoint, we believe that this goal is, on the one hand, very ambitious for Ukraine, and on the other, it's quite achievable, because we need to set the pace and develop and start developing different trajectories for the cities. Now let me turn to about and talk to the sectors, about the sectors, not to take away a lot of your time. In the energy sector, we expect the biggest transformations. We are reducing the number of coal-based thermal power plants. We want to encourage more renewable developments and increase the share of biomass in this process. This has to do with the implementation and reduction of the emissions from the biggest incineration facilities. After 2025, we are planning to launch the national emission sales platform, and also to upgrade our district heating systems. In industry, we still keep the opportunities for growth, but at the same time, it is expected that from the standpoint of emissions per one thing produced, I mean, per one product, there must be environment-friendlier technologies encouraged. We also want to encourage more renewable energy used, and to reduce the share of fossil fuels, switch to electricity instead of coal, and also the reuse of the heat that's being generated. So we want to encourage more infrastructure and communal enterprises that require to be upgraded, and their energy efficiency must be raised. This, on the one hand, can help them reduce their energy consumption and enhance their efficiency. And on the other hand, it's going to give it's going to produce more sustainable urban infrastructure. In transportation, it is expected that electricity share will increase. The e-vehicles will be growing in their number across all the sectors, and a special emphasis is put on the public transit to be more environment friendly. More emphasis is also made on the railway as one of the most climate sustainable means of transport. Encourage more use of biofuels, and also development of sustainable transportation infrastructure. Encourage more bicycles to actually reduce emissions even more. Energy efficiency of buildings, because buildings are one of the most active energy consumers. There's nothing new there. There is thermal modernization or insulation of buildings, improved use of district heating systems and water supply in buildings. So we're talking about the urban and municipal buildings, both of private and public ownership. Also, we had this warm loans program, but of course we need more tools and mechanisms to speed up and strengthen the performance of those projects in in the efficiency, energy efficiency in buildings. Regarding agriculture, we expect a slight growth in the greenhouse gas emissions. So we expect that in the agriculture, they will start implementing activities to stop the increase of the greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, I mean, the yields are expected to be higher. And of course, that will lead to even more emissions. So we think more technologies have to be implemented to handle the issues of drafts, to retain the water resources and nutrients. And on the other hand, this will help the agriculture be more efficient. This is about fertilizer used to again reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also, this is going to give an opportunity to increase the share of organic agriculture at the level of more than 3%, and the respective national program will be implemented very soon. Regarding the forestry sector, we also realized that the Ukrainian forests are absorbing emissions a lot, so it's very important to implement more environment-friendly use of the forest resources. We also need to increase the share of our forests as natural reserves. So we have to take care of our ecosystems around the cities, specifically enlarge our green areas. And that's very important in terms of the adaptation to climate change, because it is expected that there'll be more drafts, hotter seasons sometimes. So the better we are prepared for it in our cities, the easier and the more comfortable it's going to be to live in the cities. Last but not least is about waste. So again, there's nothing new here either. So we're actually talking about implementing proper waste management practices to also encourage recycling and reuse of those resources, to have segregated waste collection. Also, those methane emissions, they come from the organic substance that exists in the landfills. So the more composting opportunities we create, the less greenhouse gas emissions there will be. So actually, landfilling should be the last resort. And there's an important thing to mention here is to the disposal of and the use of the landfill methane and also leachates should be handled properly. Under the project, we have estimated the overall investment required, and we have come up with the figure of 102 billion euros. In some of the sectors, ambitions went less, and actually, right now, for the government and for the ministry specifically, it's one of the most important objectives is how to actually start this transformation based on the regulatory frameworks and policies, and how to create preconditions to facilitate and attract more funding, both domestically and through external financial mechanisms. So apart from this overall general investment that has to be attracted, there are standalone climatic areas here. So the ministry right now is trying to build the Ukrainian climatic fund or climate fund, so that the taxes that are being paid for CO2 emissions and other environmental taxes to be used as a reinvestment mechanism. This way, we're going to create a system that's going to help either to repay the loans or co-finance some of those projects that are aimed at the transformation that I have told you about today. Municipalities should have access to those financial resources and funds. The funds have to be available also to the industrial companies and other entities. So we will be wondering to listen to the cities, what they think in order to actually make sure there is proper funding provided by the state. And the funding that can be used in a much more efficient manner at the local level. We've also been involved in the development of the regulatory frameworks to attract the green bonds so that at the national and the municipal levels, we could create an opportunity to attract and involve this mechanism. And probably this is it from my side. I'm going to stay here till the end of the meeting. I'm just wondering to hear more about the comments and proposals from our cities. Please share your vision about this transformation. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Irina. And in your last slide, you listed some of the sectors. And opening the part of this, of these discussion with the cities and local governments, can you tell me, from out of all those from all those sectors like transport, buildings, etc., agriculture, what are the sectors which you believe can make the most ambitious and the most substantial contribution? Which from those sectors to be transformed have to be actually handled locally at the municipal level? Well, first of all, energy efficiency in the city infrastructures. This is district heating. This is energy efficiency in buildings, whatever ownership they are. This is also regarding the development of public transit and creating proper transportation infrastructure that creates opportunities for the people to move conveniently, to be mobile in the city, even without having a car, because all other means of transport are much better from the environmental standpoint than passenger cars. Also, we need to encourage proper waste management. This is composting, this is segregation or sorting, like they call it, as well as recycling. Thanks very much, Irina. Right here in the chat, I shared the link to this policy paper, which describes so many different sectors where they plan to cut emissions under the nationally determined contribution number 2. You can actually read it over there. And my key question that's going to go to the next speakers will be regarding those sectors that you have kindly mentioned under the nationally determined contributions and emission reduction goals. What are the sectors that can make the biggest contribution? Where is the transformation challenging? And all in all, how is the situation going on at the locally? How difficult or easy it is to incorporate and encourage those climate solutions? First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Alexander Slobozhan. He's an executive director from the Association of the Ukrainian Cities. Alexander, hello there. I think you are the right person to talk to because you represent the Association of the Ukrainian Cities, and I'm sure that you know about the current situation much more than anybody else. So what is your opinion? What helps right now and what doesn't in reaching those ambitious goals? And does the vision of the cities match with your plans and with what the ministry has planned? And Irina just presented this. So I want to encourage all the speakers to just limit your welcoming remarks to 5 to 6 minutes, because we're going to have a discussion after. First of all, we're going to listen to your welcoming remarks, and then we're going to switch to the discussion. Alexander, good afternoon. It's so nice to take part in today's event. Excuse me, we cannot hear you. What about now? No, you can't? I can.
Чути?
Can you hear me now?
Добре, да.
Yes. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure for me to take part in today's event, and it's so nice that we have our colleagues here from Zhytomyr and Mykolaiv, as well as other cities. I've seen Mr. Sukhomlin, and I've seen Mr. Lukov. He now works in Mykolaiv, and before this, he had worked in Voznesensk. First of all, we are putting together today around 1,000 municipalities. They are broken down into 4 chambers. Those are chambers of large, medium-sized, and small cities and towns. So the smallest chamber is large cities. But when talking about the most relevant issues, then of course, we now work closer with the chamber 1 and 2 because the third and the fourths, we haven't yet seen a lot of activity there. However, we're trying to encourage this and incentivize their activity. They are being transformed after the administrative and territorial reform. And I would like you to also be mindful of this whenever you want to actually implement your events with regards to preventing preventing climate change impact and footprint. So actually, the cities work a lot on energy efficiency matters, thermal insulation in buildings, and many medium-sized cities have joined the program like Mayors for Economic Growth, where they have uptaken very ambitious goals and targets. The most relevant issue is energy saving and energy efficiency, given we have a big problem because the parliament has to adopt the bill 3548 to restructure and sign off the previous time debts to perform the memorandum signed between the government and Naftogaz Ukraine and the Ukrainian Association of Cities. So the most important thing right now is how this legislation will work and how those different activities will be implemented from the anti-crisis HQ standpoint and how this is going to work. So far, this mechanism, I mean, Energy Efficiency Fund has not yet been very efficient for our cities, for the condominium owner associations, and for the municipalities in general. And the third point is, well, a lot has been talked about changes in the budgets, and I want to be honest with you. With regards to the mechanisms of funding to encourage environment taxes, etc., this issue requires a lot of adjustment. And Irina also touched upon this issue already, and she slightly touched upon this. Another point is our active cooperation in the area of the so-called waste management. It's our city's second priority, regardless whether we talk about large cities, medium-sized, or small. And there is another one as well, which is about the legislation on the land use, opening the land market. So right now, there's a bill already submitted to the parliament on the regional strategy where they suggest that all the local self-governments will have to develop their own strategies, and there will be an environmental component in all of them. It's going to be the strategic environmental assessment. There are strategies in some of the cities, but those strategies have to be updated very much. And we need to take stock of the available land resources, how the land resources are handled. So the first thing that creates a barrier is no non-implemented changes to the land, budgetary, tax, and other legislations. For instance, the solid waste management is not yet handled properly. It's still a pending issue. So these are the main areas that I would like to mention in a nutshell. Again, you were talking about the emerald chain. Yeah, you know why it is important? It's important to take stock of everything, to inventorize all we have. And it depends heavily on the cities. So it depends a lot on the municipalities' will to involve themselves in doing this. And this perfectly matches what the ministry has said. We even suggested to sign a memorandum with the ministry, an MOU, to have a greater awareness raising campaign among the medium-sized municipalities. So right now we have the representatives of municipalities who in their own economic development strategies and in their social projects have come to the issues of climate change. They have even signed the memorandum with the Alliance of North American Cities. This is also an environmental platform. And Mr. Sukhomlin already spoke at the Parliament of Ukraine and told about their best practice. We need to also spread the word across smaller cities and towns. We need to build awareness of why this work is so much important. This is something that I wanted to tell you about since the very beginning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Alexander. It is indeed very important that we together have proper understanding that we have a great number of good initiatives that take a lot of time, very long time to implement. So without the secondary legislation, without making proper decisions reflected in the bylaws, the cities will never be able to take the best possible advantage of all these mechanisms. It is my pleasure right now to give the floor to Andrei Martinyuk, and he represents the Eco Club NGO. This organization is based in Rivne. They cooperate a lot with local government and regional governments. So from the standpoint of your communication with the representatives of local governments, what do you think? What is the nationally determined contribution? Does it take into account the best interests of the cities? And secondly, what must be there for the cities to be heard? Maybe there is something standing on this way to build a proper and smoother, seamless, environment-friendly policies. Thanks very much, Oksana. Thanks very much for having the opportunity to participate in today's event. What I'd like to tell you about, in continuation of what Alexander just told, actually, it seems to us that in Ukraine, we sometimes are missing many opportunities, but we do not have, because we do not have proper institutional mechanisms, for instance, for the nationally determined contributions that could encourage the local communities to get engaged in developing those papers. And had we had those mechanisms in place, we would have had much less challenges, which I would like to tell you about a bit more right now. Alexander already mentioned just now about the number of different issues which have to do with climate change. This is in land legislation, environment fund, etc. But what it seems to us, in Ukraine, we do not have this solid, coordinated climate policy aimed at the local government engagement. We've seen some of the lead cities in climate issues around Ukraine. But in order to understand what kind of position there is in the country, that want to take care of the development of the cities, and they're committed to keep working on the climate change issues. However, it is important to understand the national level attitude to such lead cities. It's sometimes difficult to tell what the central government thinks about those cities. And speaking about another challenge, sometimes the incentives that are generated by the government agencies, they sometimes are very ambiguous. The most outspoken example is the situation with the district heating networks. Many cities inherited the infrastructure from Soviet Union, and this district heating network helps a lot to transition to the low carbon local economy. But the public policy that exists in this sector leads to the situation that those district heating infrastructures, instead of benefits and advantages, these networks create bigger challenges for the local population. This district heating becomes a real burden for municipalities and for the municipal budgets in particular. Local leaders mayors have to think about this problem all the time and make decisions promptly. For some reason, they believe that it's important to actually refuse from using district heating. Because over decades, these networks and this infrastructure has never been funded properly. No substantial investment was encouraged in this system. So those nationwide incentives and climate policies have to be coordinated, engaging and involving all the government actors and private as well, with one single clear message that we need to cut emissions and not do some have those tricky practices when the national level just forgets about, for instance, the district heating issue and throw this problem onto the heads of the local governments. We need to also find solutions jointly. So I'm ready to actually give the floor to our next speaker. Thanks very much, Andriy. Indeed, those issues are really, really tangible and they are very, very relevant. Thank you for mentioning district heating. However, there are other sectors as well when something is being declared at the national level and then the pragmatic work has to be done locally. Sometimes those declarations are so ambiguous that they actually are crossed with the practical implementation planning. So we want to have much less of that. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. We have Serhiy Sukhomlin, Mayor of Zhytomyr. And this is a real climate champion city. Zhytomyr is one of the most progressive cities in the ambitious climate policy. In my own point of view, Zhytomyr was, if not the first city in Ukraine, which announced their readiness to transition to 100% renewable energy generation by 2050. Serhiy, Mr. Mayor, like to the other speakers, I want to ask about your opinion about the nationally determined contribution number 2 to the Paris Agreement, how much it is aligned with the best interests of the city, what could be improved in which sectors, which has been mentioned in the NDC2. I'm sure there are already some successful practices that can be shared. And my second question is about your city as a climate champion, like I said. So what kind of goals do you have to switch completely to renewable energy? How do you want to pursue this issue? And how it actually helps accept such ambitious goals? Because we listened to the presentation of the Race to Zero campaign with very ambitious tasks as well. What helps you actually encourage such goals and what helps you achieve them? Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello from Zhytomyr. First of all, I have to tell you that indeed the Zhytomyr city is a signee of the mayor's agreement, and we have our energy sustainability partner. And we received an award from the European Union regarding this. Indeed, Zhytomyr has become the first signee that was committed to move to 100% renewable energy over 2050. And we already developed our city's strategy for this. We have developed 3 different scenarios, and I'd like to tell you that accepting such ambitious goals for the state really allows us to incentivize our community in trying to build their plans. But there are some of the things that have to be mentioned here, which make our work really challenging sometimes for both the state and for the local government. What I'd like to mention here is that today we talked a lot about the district heating and building insulation, thermal insulation in buildings. We were talking about transport, etc. The environmental ministry has done a lot for the strategy to be embodied and implemented in life. However, those efforts are not enough. They do not suffice. To make sure the strategy is performed, we need to put together the efforts of at least 3 to 4 ministries. This is the Regional Development Ministry, which has to coordinate their plans in line with the strategy. This is also the Fuel and Energy Ministry, which sometimes is in competition with cities because they have their own plans they want to actually follow. Because okay, Naftogaz wants to sell more natural gas to generate more money, while cities are planning to reduce the use of those fossil fuels. If we take thermal and energy generation and heating, we have upgraded a lot of infrastructure through the loans that we received from the EBRD and the assistance we have been receiving from the European Union and from Switzerland. In particular, we were receiving extra funding and support. So over the last couple of years, our companies, after 2 years, I think from this time, those companies will be profitable. And in Zhytomyr, we have the lowest electricity tariffs as compared to the rest of Ukraine. So we can deliver much better quality services. And regarding the energy losses, we only have 6% in some of the upgraded districts, while the national average is 12. So we have the program which is called the energy efficient houses. Naturally, this program is really ambitious, but that's a small example, at least, that you can see quite successfully implemented in the city of Zhytomyr. To encourage high quality modernization and thermal insulation, we need to upgrade our networks and start building the heating networks that will actually contribute to much more smart use of the energy resources. What I want to tell you here about this is that we need to align our plans with those of other ministries and other government bodies. Those plans cannot be aligned right now because the associations of the apartment owners, they are a self-governing organizations. And we need to encourage cooperation with those as well. Again, speaking about transport, Zhytomyr has procured 50 new trolley buses. And we also expect to procure more e-buses, electric buses. Last week already, we had a meeting with our Turkish company, sorry, that is ready to open and start their production, manufacturing of those buses, so they can actually convert the conventional buses working on natural gas or diesel to convert them into EVs. So of course, it's very expensive to procure those trolley buses. So we need more support from the central government to keep those programs running. Speaking about solid waste management, this problem is not holistically solved anywhere in Ukraine completely. So with the support from our European partners, we could encourage more progress there. Without that, we will not be able to handle it. What we have to do is create a system that will help launch the mass construction of waste treatment facilities. We already have one, but it's a pilot project for Ukraine. And you know why? Because 40% of waste, this a RDF. This is fuel that can be incinerated. In our legislation, we do not have RDF mentioned at all. And therefore, we cannot use this waste as fuel. elaborating changes to the legislation. Once implemented, we will attract more investment. The volumes of RDF in our region is 35%, is ready to replace 35% of natural gas. So what I'm talking about here is, yes, indeed, we support the initiative from the ministries and the Ukrainian state. So in parallel, we are ready to align our strategies and invest into them, into their implementation. First of all, this brings a lot of benefits. That this is lucrative for the local budgets. This is profitable. I'm not even talking about environment. It's clear. This creates much better competition between the cities for the people. And that's the most important resource that we have to compete for. But we're not competing with the Ukrainian cities only, but we're competing with the cities of Poland, Czech Republic, and other countries. So we want to ensure proper environmental conditions so that people want to stay in this country and not leave. For this, clear alignment and joint efforts are needed between central and local governments to make sure the strategy becomes a reality for us. But here, I would also like to stress to what the Ministry of Environment has said. We will not be able, without cooperation, to make the strategy really a living thing. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. You stressed the importance of this cross-sectoral cooperation, and it's not only about the Ministry of Environment, it has to also engage other actors. Like Irina already mentioned, the ministry has been doing a lot what depends on them, but discussions are still hot um, with the other stakeholders regarding the nationally determined contributions. Thanks a lot, and today we have also a representative from Mykolaiv, Vitaly Lukov, the first deputy mayor of Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv is also getting more and more advanced in their practical action to reduce emissions. And as far as I know, apart from what's going on in upgrading your water supply systems, in your city hospitals where you have solar panels, it's nice that you're implementing such things. And my question to you, apart from your own evaluation of the nationally determined contributions, and also in those sectors that we talked about already, in your city, you have a department, a whole department that is handling. You have so many people working there in that department. It is responsible for those transformations. So how much important it is to have this institutional capacity in the city and the people who are working directly in the city or the city council on implementing those specific projects, please. Good afternoon, Oksana. Good afternoon, everybody. Irina, thank you very much. You made me surprised because it's never the case that the representatives of ministries stay till the end of the event. Normally, they just say some of the welcoming remarks and leave. Again, excuse us for not having our mayor with you today, but we have two deputies instead. So we're going to try to compensate Mr. Mayor's absence. Dmitry Lazarev is the subject matter deputy mayor for energy efficiency. And not accidentally, we are here together. Regarding our requests or vision for climate policies, you already quite well presented all the information. We only encourage and ask one thing. Please make sure this strategy does not change greatly over time, because we've had this experience when we were trying to actually implement those nighttime electricity tariffs. So we invested a lot of effort and financial resources into implementing these nighttime tariffs, which was used to be twice cheaper than the daytime. We invested a lot into this and then they abolished it. They just lifted it at the end of the day. So let us actually keep the track and do not change all the rules severely very often. Let us go step by step to this goal. So I want to wish more stability right now. Indeed, Mykolaiv just recently received an award together with Lviv in terms of quality cooperation with the State Energy Efficiency Fund. And we have a hope that we will be able to continue working further on. Quite difficult the discussions are with the members of parliament to fund this program. At the same time, we have quite an ambitious goal right now to upgrade our water supply network. And I would like to refrain from purely using electricity, because e-vehicles and e-trolley buses and other electronic vehicles need to get this power from somewhere. If this electricity is generated by the TPPs, I have big doubts that it's going to be a very important contribution into the climate change. So we need to think holistically. For this purpose, we have now built an ambitious plan to replace fossil fuels in our water supply networks, but with the solar energy facilities. So thanks very much, Andrei. We already have very good experience of cooperating with you in the number of previous initiatives. In Voznesensk, we have built the solar power plant. And we have our own electricity right now. It pays back so well. So it would be great if at the level of the national government, we could receive even more support to build similar solar stations that could give an opportunity to diversify our power supply with no additional burden, and to deliver this energy directly to our facilities. Because we have a lot of facilities like this in our city's ownership at the municipal level. We could generate a lot more energy, but we do not enjoy as much support as businesses do, who are willing to generate more green energy to the Ukrainian power grid. Had we had this kind of support, this would incentivize everybody. We could actually solve a number of different problems at a time. This would reduce the tariffs, this would reduce emissions, this would diversify our power supply, this would diversify our supply resources. And it's going to contribute with many, many more factors. It's going to have a very substantial effect. So we already have the experience and some of the developments. We are ready to be the pilot. We're looking for partners. I'm sure this would be a very interesting initiative that we could run together. According to our estimates, we could generate more than 5,000 megawatt hours per annum only in our water supply company. This is going to be 18% of the entire electricity the water supplying company consumes. Because we are taking water from Dnipro, that's more than 80 kilometers away from our city. So we're pumping this water to the city, and a big share of the tariff is there for the transportation of this water. I don't want to take away a lot of your time. We have very similar issues and challenges like other cities, because we have similar cities like Zhytomyr. Well, we all share the same problems. We want to have smart rules at the national level, and then this success story will be multiplied and everybody will benefit from it. So if you have any questions, go ahead. Yeah, the colleague of mine already told you everything about this, so there's nothing much to add, but still I would like to actually once again emphasize Mykolaiv was one of the first cities to have implemented this public policy on energy efficiency, energy saving, environment friendliness, etc. Right now we are cooperating with the foreign investors in building alternative boilers to reduce CO2 emissions. So given We are in the south of Ukraine. We have a lot of sunny days, but unfortunately not today. We need to take advantage of these resources available as an alternative to traditional generation. It would be a stupid thing not to take advantage of the solar generation opportunities. We've had some good experience of implementing very ambitious projects. So please, we are ready to be the platform for further discussions and further very ambitious projects of alternative fuels and alternative energy. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Vitaly and Mitro. We can see definitely that a lot of work has been done locally already. So thanks very much to all the honorable speakers for the welcoming remarks. And now the remaining 20 minutes of our meeting, we're going to have a more Q&A, more to the Q&A side. So you can think about a question you want to ask and put it on the chat. So far, our participants are putting their thoughts together. We already had some of the questions in the chat, and I'm going to read them now. And the first question was to Mykolaiv city, and it's a bit provocative. They ask in the chat how much the city is ready to accept this challenge and switch to renewable energy 100%. Look, we are pragmatic people here. As the experience has shown, including that in the European Union, with all the ambitious goals and declarations, still the number of gas pipelines is growing towards the European Union. We realize that there is no eternal engines and internal motors, perpetuum mobile. There is nothing like this. So we realize that the energy consumption is still growing. So we need to find, I'm sure, a very sophisticated solution so that on the one hand, we consume less energy, and the energy we consume still should be at least more efficient. So to tell you the truth, we have a chance to coordinate our action with the national level government actors. If we, for instance, encourage more decisions on increasing tariffs on the heat, the more we increase, the worse the situation is going to be. So we need to be fair towards the people and in between yourselves. Then I'm sure we're going to get much more sophisticated results in the end. Whether we are ready to switch to 100% renewable energy, no, we're not yet, but we are working on it. 2050 will come very soon, believe me. Thank you, thank you. You mentioned the windmills in Germany. I mean, not windmills, but wind generation facilities, not only on the land, but also in the seas. But you know, but you know, those wind generators, they are not installed in the cities. They are installed in the rural areas. And here is my next question. How do we deal with those sectors that have to do with cities in terms of CO2 emission reduction? But the cities may not have a proper mandate, even as a result of decentralization. What I'm talking about here is transition to renewable energy. Many cities in Ukraine are still facing a challenge. They cannot supply enough electricity, and they need to procure it not from within the cities, but from other power plants. Yes, indeed, we have nuclear power plants. We have 15 NPP units that produce 50% of the Ukraine's electricity. To say that cities can move completely to renewable energy, that's a difficult story to tell. I mean, that's a difficult objective. But there are industrial facilities that generate a lot of emissions, I mean, of greenhouse gases and other pollutants, and they are sometimes based in the cities. Do cities have enough opportunities to regulate the situation and those facilities? Or let's take a transportation that is going through the cities. There are sectors which have to do with the cities, but the cities are not in their control. Because how to handle this situation? Or maybe everybody already has enough mandates and opportunities to be able to solve those issues. What do you think about that? Or maybe there is someone who would like to start now. I can see Serhiy. Serhiy, please go ahead.
Ну, перш за все, хочу сказати, ви
Well,
дійсно
first of all, you indeed asked a very right question, because when we were developing the renewable energy strategy, we came to understanding that the city may not even get the information about how much gas is being consumed by itself, because the monopoly companies do not share this information with us. We were writing to the national regulator and we never received an answer from them. So we were trying to actually make our own estimates. Okay, we might be up to 20% wrong, but the city cannot even receive this simple information about the overall consumption of the natural gas. But we can already influence some of the other factors, and we, for that, need legislative changes. Like I said, in order to measure the emissions by companies, we do not have this mandate. But we are nevertheless ready to jump in once we are giving the proper mandate to do that. What do we do, for instance, with wastewater? We have several companies in the city that generate a lot of wastewater. They have installed proper equipment, and we have been checking, examining their performance right now. So the amounts that they are paying are several millions every month. And there are several companies like this. They started building their own water treatment facilities because they realized it would be cheaper for them than paying to the municipal government for this. Unlike Mykolaiv, we never invested into nighttime tariffs. We just replaced all the street lighting with diode lamps. Speaking about the cargo transport, we don't have any specific problems because we have already the available legislation, and we can already control the traffic together with the police. We're now installing cameras, and we also implementing many initiatives to solve the issue of transportation. Well, the heating company, it is under modernization right now. We are now building 4 TPPs for the city, and we will therefore reduce the consumption of natural gas by 70%. Plus, we're going to be generating a lot of electricity to cover the needs of all the companies in the city completely. So it is possible to actually switch to 100% renewable energy. So once the proper legislative amendments are in place on RDF, this is going to be a big solution. So I've seen that there are already solutions that can work quite sustainably. And you know, some of the solutions are really pay back really well. I mean, they are so feasible from the economic standpoint because they use alternative fuel. They use wood chips, and they have very environment-friendly solutions from the use of refuse-derived fuel. Thank you. Alexander, please. Yes, I would like to actually add to what Sergey just said. We have the second wave of the local self-government reform. It's about assigning the competences and mandates to the local level. So right now, it's a very convenient time to think about this and start working on it, because in the current legislation on local self-governments, there is a part that is related to the strategies that have a major climate change impact. So once amendments are there, then the subject matter ministries would be encouraged to actually provide more support to the cities. Cities have to do some of the things while they do not have funding for it. And that has to be managed together with the revenues and spendings completely reflected in the budget code. But the smallest city association members, those are the towns, and even bigger cities like Kiev and Zhytomyr, they do not even have enough mandate for the full-fledged implementation of their policies in this sector. This has to do with city planning, and the colleagues of ours already said about the solar panels to be installed on the roofs of all the municipal buildings. Yes, of course, for this, we need to have the proper mandate, have more controlling functions and oversight mechanisms. That's the one. Number two, with this bill regarding public transit, it's important to actually pursue it. And we need to think more about those people who have the right to travel by public transit free of charge. I mean, they have the benefits because they also generate more spendings for the cities. Plus, we need to think about how to upgrade our fleet that would generate less emission. Same thing about land use. We need to take stock of all the land resources, like I already mentioned. Like I said about the natural reserves, etc. I already mentioned this in my previous intervention. Again, about the regarding land and water use in the municipality, I want to once again stress our mandate for that. 95% of landfills in Ukraine should have been closed like 10 years ago, at least. But even the cities do not have enough mandate to do that. We don't have that mandate yet. So, of course, we just have to penalize those who are just dumping the trash and just to on the side of the streets and side of the roads. It's again, we have very limited mandate with the current budgetary code, and we of course want to encourage change in this matter. I can list a lot of different things, but I believe, and anyways, that our today's event is a very great opportunity to then define our strategy and our policy framework for the future. Once we're ready to implement, once we have the mandate, once we have the financial resources in place, and we have the proper legislation, therefore, I'm sure we're gonna handle those issues in a much more productive and efficient way. I believe it is high time to start this work and start the discussion. But we don't have enough. Like I said, with the mandate that we have is not sufficient right now. Thank you for your attention. Thanks very much, Alexander. And first of all, thank you very much for this very proactive position and your association's readiness to be a real dialogue platform. Because in the chat, our participants already raised the issue that communication between government and local stakeholders like cities is often very underappreciated in Ukraine and underestimated. That's why it's not enough communication. It would be good to have a communication platform that could actually give an advantage of hearing and listening to all the stakeholders and actors regarding the development of environmental policies, cross-sectoral cooperation and its implementation. Irina, did you want to say anything regarding this issue? I can tell. I just switched on my video, but I want to thank you very much for listing those very important issues that the cities are facing with regards to the mandate. Of course, yes, there is no proper understanding yet at the top government level regarding the complexity of this issue. We as the ministry are ready to be your advocates and to advocate whatever changes you want to foster. I would like to add that not only communication is a challenge, between central government and the cities, because we are right now trying to actually build this climate architecture today to coordinate much better whatever the ministries are doing in this respect. And also we want to encourage more coordination in this NDC2 process. I also wanted to reiterate that according to the presidential decree, we need to develop and submit a bill to the parliament. This bill is a long-term low carbon development strategy, something like this, to be climate neutral by 2050. And because this is a framework legislation, it should contain some of the issues of strategic vision. And those issues can be included, like the mandate, access to information, communication, coordination, etc. So we're going to be glad to be cooperating with the Association of the Ukrainian Cities for them to be able to also make a contribution into this. And we're going to be monitoring together the performance of this bill when it becomes the law. So we're gradually moving to the closure of today's event. We only have 10 minutes to go. We have some more questions in the chat, which we would like to address right now. There was a question about the technology and the state-of-the-art technology of land treatment that could actually help us handle land to keep carbon in the soil. But today, the technology has not been used broadly. In more advanced countries like the United Kingdom, for instance, and Ukraine, sometimes, somewhere, they have been already using this. But the question is how to integrate this technology and what could be done about this. I would like to actually paraphrase it a little bit and also cover some other technologies. How those best technologies that are available in this world, they're well known already, they are accessible. How can those technologies be much faster integrated into our cities? And what the national level can do for this, as well as central government and local governments. What can be done nationally and what can be done locally? Let us start with you, Irina. All right. Actually, the issue of agriculture is really interesting because we've talked a lot about this with the Association of Cities, about the climate goals in agriculture. And what's interesting is that many farmers already start looking for these technologies and implementing them, like no-till technology, because they are looking for ways to retain nutrition and moisture in the soil. So this way they combine both the climatic goals and also this makes their farming business more efficient. This helps actually improve the condition of the land and of the yields. What I also wanted to tell you about is from the interesting things that we've seen. Actually, I do not really trust the central government can all the time update those databases because the situation is changing all the time. Those subject matter associations do a much better job there. But it's important, though, that the government understands what kind of technology has to be included into and supported at the national level. In agriculture, that's an interesting fact. Indeed, there are Ukrainian producers who already developed the low-till and middle-till technologies. And because they had the program, it was the government support program to procure Ukrainian agricultural equipment and hardware. There has been support there. And it was found to be not a it was found to be a very efficient mechanism to encourage and stimulate more technology like this, technological development in Ukraine. But this requires a more, so to say, conscious public policy. The state has to provide this support, develop such programs to incentivize these developments in Ukraine and to support their implementation. So this two-way communication in this context is really important. Thanks a lot, Irina. Is anybody else willing to add anything to this from our speakers? And then we're going to be actually moving towards the closing of this event. Yes, when we're talking about innovation, well, agriculture is not the subject of my expertise, but I'm going to tell you about the water supplying companies. There are very few companies in Ukraine that are ready to supply clean, good quality water. Not even speaking about the water treatment facilities, I mean, wastewater treatment facilities. If we don't handle this issue, we're going to have even more threats. Right now, we are upgrading our Zhytomyr water supplying company. Like I already said, this is going to be probably the best company ever in Ukraine. And next year, we're going to start actually upgrading our wastewater treatment facilities. Over the last couple of years, we have cut the losses of water at the rate of 20,000 cubic meters. And that pays back. That's really beneficial. This keeps our tariffs on the lower side. But understanding how Ukraine is placed right now in water supply, and the forecasts are not very good in terms of the water resources available in Ukraine. So we are planning, therefore, to start launching the projects of making our water supplying network clearly autonomous, so that we can treat water and then use it again and not just dump it. This is about technology and innovation, actually. We are thinking already today about this, together with the experts from the World Bank. Thanks a lot. Yes, Andriy. Just a bit about technology and innovation. Why they are underestimated sometimes, both in the cities and at the national level. Earlier on, our organization hosted information days, and there was a big demand for it because people wanted to come and see how actually the developments, what kind of developments are happening at the local level. And these innovation ideas and their penetration sometimes stumbles over the fact that people do not have an opportunity to see and talk to each other, to see what the opportunities are about. And secondly, there are a lot of Ukrainians who still have myths about climate, a lot of them. Let's look at the survey data. Most of the Ukrainians think that the main problem in the climate change is about the dump sites, where people just irregularly throw their waste on the side of the streets and roads. But it's a very important objective for us to build awareness and to engage people into implementing such solutions. We need to keep explaining why Zhytomyr is so much advanced, why it is so progressive, and then with the public awareness, we're going to get a lot more support. I'm sorry, this was something very generic, but I believe that this is an important contribution. This is a very important issue that is sometimes underestimated. You know, all those projects are challenging. They are difficult sometimes. Not in all the cities there are sufficient teams that are ready to keep them implemented. We need support from the state, because we normally started with small projects, first of all, and then with the experience that we've received, we started implementing larger ones. But it's much easier for the local government to create our park or may fix the road, and people appreciate this much better. I mean, climate is something for the people. Climate is something, okay, that's not an issue for today. We'll think about it tomorrow. So sometimes we have to do things that are not very popular and invest in the things that will pay back in 20 or 30 years. That's what the strategy has to be about. Thank you very much. Of course, we need to have this long-term vision for our planning to handle the climate change issue. So we're closing our discussion right now. And at the very end, I would like to actually ask each and every speaker today to answer two questions. First of all, from the standpoint of NDC2 implementation. In the chat, already we have an answer about how the cities can join the Race to Zero campaign. And we've heard about the advantages of that. When cities participate in implementing those ambitious objectives in the United Kingdom. So my first question that I'd like to ask is, does Ukraine need, do Ukrainian cities need to accept those ambitious goals? And is this going to help in fostering and streamlining much better climate change policy in Ukraine? That's my first question. And my second question is, do you feel any lack of communication between the national and the local levels regarding climate change? Or maybe some additional communication channels are needed, or maybe some other platforms to maintain this dialogue. Do we need to develop this area or not? So please take 1 minute each and address these questions. If there is anyone willing to answer first, please go ahead. So my first question is, do ambitious climatic goals help? And second is, do we need any other communication channels? Yeah, let me start because I will have to leave soon. I'm sure we need the goals because unless we have the goals, we don't know where to go to, what the speed should be, and we can actually keep silent about those goals. So we all need to understand, everybody needs to understand where we're moving, and everybody has to adjust to that. In relation to climate change, I think we need to invite everybody, all the levels of government, business, civil society, and all the actors. Regarding communication, it seems to me, yes, we need more communication channels and platforms. There are some of the tools available already. There are platforms in place, but we need to actually disseminate those platforms to build a much better quality communication for the better public policy and better implementation. Thanks very much for organizing this event. I was so glad to see everyone. Thanks, Serhiy, because we met before. And thanks to the representatives of the Mykolaiv City Council. Thanks to the Association of the Ukrainian Cities. Hopefully we're going to implement a lot of good things together, and it's not our last meeting, is it? So it's just the beginning of our dialogue, and this way we're going to be working together in achieving the climate change goals that we intend to achieve. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Have a very efficient day, and thank you very much. Thanks, Irina. Irina already passed the floor to Serhiy, and now we would like to also listen to the representatives of the cities. So, Serhiy, we start with you, please. Yes, indeed, communication is vitally important because sometimes we have a different opinion about the same things. Our opinions can be different, so we need to better communicate together about the regulatory frameworks and legislation. Then, of course, some of these processes may go much faster. We also need to accept the commitments and pursue those ambitious goals. Why? Because first of all, first comes the dream, and after the dream is there, you now start developing your strategy. Once you've done this, you try to find the investors and you try to find the funding, and then you come to the implementation once found. So we raise funds either through loans or grant money, whenever it is available as well.
Але іноземні інвестори,
But the foreign investors and the IFIs will never invest anything into the city unless you have a proper commitment and proper strategy in place. So in order to keep going and to be efficient and receive the funding, you need to develop the proper strategy and action plans. And most importantly, it is to implement the strategies. Then, of course, based on this best practice, the investors will arrive. Vitaly and Dmitro, you were provoked and when you were asked about the ambitious goals of the city. Do you think it is important to make such political declarations regarding climate? Do you think those are useful? And do we need any additional communication on this and work better to work much better with the stakeholders? Yes, of course. I think we could be actually characterized as pessimists, but the action plan is definitely important. We need to understand where we're moving and how we're doing that. It would be ideal if our action plan and if our local action plan and the national level action plans match together. It's important to marry those action plans. That's why the strategy has to be there, I'm sure. Yes, we're working on it now. Maybe it's too early to tell about the outcomes yet, because this is a very new process for us. And regarding communication, definitely communication must be there. It would be great to have those communications in place with at least in the format like we have today. It would be great, of course, to see everybody in person. And we need to learn more and share some of those best practices. We don't have to invent the new things sometimes. We just have to start listening to each other. And maybe we have some good cases and successful practices in place. It's going to save a lot of time and effort for us, I'm sure. Actually, each and everyone has something to share. Thank you so much. Andrei. Yeah, it's difficult to add something brand new, but the only thing that I wanted to add actually is that in the cities, we do not have a lot of opportunities for common people to join to this energy transition, both from the communication standpoint and active participation as well. We need to communicate much better and build awareness to find the right approaches for the people to be able to actually benefit from this participation, because we can hear a lot of complaints that local self-governments do not just have an opportunity to provide any kind of feedback regarding the projects and some of the paperwork. But I'm sure we need to have this regular communication platform and maintain it and support it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrei. Thank you. Thanks very much to all the speakers today. And thanks very much to all the participants who made it today and joined us at this meeting. And also sorry for taking a bit more time for us. This is highly appreciated. This shows ourselves how much interest there is to climate change and to how we should handle the situation and how we should communicate between the national level and local. There is one important conclusion that can be made. We all have to work together on the climate change matters. And today it was emphasized many times that cities will only benefit from this. Definitely, within just one discussion, we could not cover all the important matters and issues, but I will remain to be committed to actually continue to work and build a proper communication platform between the national and local levels. We, from the standpoint of Heinrich Böll Stiftung, will be doing everything possible for this area of our joint work to be functional. And thanks very much to the Embassy of the United Kingdom for your contribution and for your restless support. I'm also so glad to the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources for facilitating the work here in terms of the Ukraine's climate policy. They remain to be open for this dialogue. And thanks very much to all the cities who have joined us today in this event, and especially the special thanks goes to Mykolaiv and Zhytomyr for their active participation in the discussion. Thanks very much for the Association of the Ukrainian Cities for, like Alexander said, their readiness to be part of this communication platform and deliver more information and build more awareness about climate change. Let us continue to work together, and hopefully we're going to come back with this issue to the more constructive dialogues where more subject matter discussions will take place on how to improve our joint cooperation together regarding climate change, both nationally and locally. Definitely, we're going to send the links to the video of today's meeting, and you will also get the presentations. Hopefully, you're going to stay with us and enjoy the upcoming events on this matter. Thank you ever so much, and hopefully, we will be in touch all the time. Good luck.